and welcome to the podcast this week. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We are powered by Safra Leadership. Safra Leadership is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Lindsay Goldford Gray, and I'm here with my co-host, Mindy Gulati. We're the co-founders of Safra, and together we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. Today, we're going to talk about assertiveness. Assertiveness is a positive indicator of status, and we talk about status a lot, which basically means others' perceptions of you. So we thought it would be a good idea to spend some time on the concept of assertiveness because we feel like there's some misconceptions, misnomers, and some ways that we'd love to offer to think about assertiveness. So, Mindy, I'll start by asking, what comes to mind when you think of assertiveness?
Yeah, and happy we're exploring this topic because it actually has recently come up in one of my coaching calls. And I think what was surprising for us was this was back a few months ago, we were in a coaching cohort, one of our software cohorts, and we brought the topic up of status, and we said, status is, warmth and assertiveness. And this word assertiveness, it just hit the group, and they had some pre-work to do. And then in the discussion, they were like, I didn't like that word. It felt very negative to them. Like, I don't know that I want to be assertive, or I don't know that, like, is that really what we're looking for? And some of them were like, I'm not assertive, or they had a negative connotation. And it's really interesting when you hear a word to see where your mind goes. Does it go to like, this is positive or this is negative? Because I think for me, I look at assertiveness as a positive, like I have a positive connotation to it. So many people look at it as negative. And I think there's a confusion. And so I'm excited to sort of define it and give you some examples. And Lindsay and I deal with this a lot in our work and sort of personally as well. And so let's dive in, Lindsay. Tell us a little bit about sort of what's the difference between assertive and aggressive. And let's kind of dismiss some of the myths about the word.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do think of aggression when they think of assertiveness. And so, I think it's helpful to define the two and make sure that there's a clear distinction. So research defines assertiveness as the ability to express your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in a direct, honest, and appropriate way that does not violate the rights of others, which is different from aggression, which is defined as standing up for your personal rights and expressing your thoughts in a way that's dishonest, inappropriate, or violates the rights of others. So the key pillar is that aggression is based on dominance. So it's often about winning at the expense of someone else, whereas assertiveness is about being direct about your own thoughts, feelings, needs, desires in a way that doesn't violate others' rights.
Yeah, and I like this definition because this whole violating others' rights, like you can be very direct and assertive. That doesn't mean like swearing at them, yelling. It doesn't mean degrading. You can still be very, very direct, and it can still be a very hard topic or hard conversation, but it's more of like, I love the dominance word too for aggressiveness, because that's where dominance comes in, is power over. And so I think it's really clear. I mean, even just thinking about this definition it's always helpful to come back to it. The other thing I think is important is, and again, this came up in a coaching call I had recently, is assertiveness is not a personality trait. So you're not born assertive and you can never, and if you're not able to ever do it. It's actually a skill set you can learn. You need to be thinking about how assertive you are, especially if you're in any sort of leadership or authority position, because it's a necessary skill and you can develop it. And so it's not that you're born assertive or you're not. There are personality traits that you're born with, and that's who you are, sort of chemically in your brain, but assertiveness is not one of them. And Lindsay and I help a lot of the folks we coach to become more assertive in these healthy ways, in a way that's direct and honest and appropriate. Especially when they're facing sort of contentious situations at work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a good example of that, oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but sometimes in management situations, for example, arises a question of whether or not the person is working their appropriate number of hours. Like that's just something, especially in remote teams, like people just, there's a question that arises.
Mhm.
And people are like, I don't even know how to ask about that. And, like they vacillate between like not doing it or like saying like, we don't think you're working enough hours. And it doesn't, at least at the outset, need to look like that. And there can be a conversation of, I want to understand what your day looks like.
Mhm.
Like walk me through a typical day for you. And do you hold any tension between other obligations in this job? Or like, do you find yourself, you know what I mean? Like you can broach the topic with direct questions and curiosity and sort of go from there in a way that's kind of not at all aggressive.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, there's this social tax that applies to women is there's a societal expectation that women should be agreeable and nice, and that really weighs heavy, I think, on a lot of women developing their assertiveness trait, and their assertiveness skills, is because they're, oh, well, how am I going to be perceived? And I think that that's why this is such a you have to personally reflect, because what was your childhood like? What are the norms in your culture and your family? And then what are the norms in your industry too? I think that for lawyers, I think women face this tax, but also part of the job of most lawyers is to be assertive, particularly in like deposition in court with opposing counsel. And so it's interesting because I think you have to understand yourself and as to why maybe you're having a hard time with the assertiveness. And assertiveness really has this skill you learn has to be authentic to who you are, but also understanding like there is a tax. I mean, I hear it all the time. And actually a lot of discrimination lawsuits are, a lot of the sort of filings of these will say like, well, I'm being seen as a bitch or aggressive, and I'm just being direct, and my male colleagues don't suffer the same sort of bias. And so I think assertiveness also, we always have to have that, both a lens of sort of, being a woman. I think people of color face a very different and more burdensome about how assertive they can be. And so I think it's really interesting to look at your personal identity and dynamics too.
Yeah. And I mean, the implicit bias there is real. I mean, I know, Mindy, you and I talk a lot about status, and we teach a lot on status. Like women are assumed, stereotyped to be warmer. And when they are assertive, they get knocked down on the warmth, right? They're viewed as less warm. And so like that penalty is real. And so I think being really clear-eyed on like, when do we speak up? How do we speak up? What's authentic to us is super important. So let's turn a little bit and talk about like, do we speak up all the time? Like as we're making these calculations on when to be assertive, especially if we're not, it doesn't come super naturally or easily to us. Like when are the like musts, right? Non-negotiables. And then when are the times where you should, do you want to walk us through sort of some of the non-negotiables on when to be assertive?
Yeah, and I think this is helpful, especially if this is sort of a skill you're developing or want to develop, is really thinking about, is this worth it? And it's sort of a cost benefit analysis. And, the point here is that like, is the thing that you're going to raise, the direct conversation you're going to have, is it essential for the project success or essential for like the psychological safety of your team? If your answer is yes, then you need to say it. You need to be assertive. You need to have that direct, transparent, open dialogue. And I think that you do have to do that calculation, because this assertiveness is not being domineering, always saying every opinion that pops in your head. Actually, I think the skill is like when to use your assertiveness so that it hits better. Or you do tend to get into aggressiveness and sort of that dominance. And I also think that it's, thinking about, having some pattern recognition around like, am I being interrupted? Am I being silenced?
Yeah.
Am I being like, are my ideas kind of being like not listened to?
Yeah.
Or am I sitting in a lot of discomfort? I think if we're in discomfort, and we know what it feels like if someone's saying something and you're like, I don't like this. that is a signal that you need to lean into assertiveness. And you got to do it again, authentic for you. And it can't be all the time, 100 miles an hour. You've really got to think about, is this worth it? But I think people hold themselves back because they don't feel like they have any power maybe in the situation. But if it's essential for a work project, if you know that things are going to go wrong, if you don't speak up, like, you have to say something. What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. As you were talking, the thing that came to mind was that a company that you consulted for, actually, where they had a project where they got off track with the budget.
Yeah.
No one spoke up. No one was assertive and said, hey, we're going to go over budget. Like, let's figure out how to get this, like, mostly on track, right? Like, let's figure out a plan. And so because no one was assertive, it just went super far off the rails.
Yeah.
And
that was one of those moments where, it ties to psychological safety, because sometimes people don't feel like they can speak up.
Yeah.
But part of it is, like, likely people on that team just they think that's not their trait. They're not like that. And so they didn't say anything. And it was millions of dollars. It was hugely significant. And someone just needed to say, hey, time out. Like, this is not working. And I can see us falling off a cliff, and nobody did. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have found myself personally in situations, and I generally am fairly comfortable with being assertive, but where close colleagues get excited in conversation, or at least that's my perception, and they'll talk over me or interrupt me. And I'm sure I'm guilty of that too, by the way. And I never could figure out how to have the right conversation with them about, like, hey, I see, like, what I'm perceiving, I'm experiencing this way. Like, let's talk about it. And so I just didn't. Like, that was something that came to mind again, where I was not assertive and should have been. But it was because I couldn't figure out how to frame it properly, how to say literally, like, what words needed to come out of my mouth. And I think that's so critical to these conversations.
Yeah, and that gets us into some of the toolkits that we want to offer. And it may sound strange, but you have to have scripts for this. So, like, in that scenario, you kind of have to practice. So the way you practice is, most of us have had the situation where we're driving home from a meeting, or we're like, gosh, I wish I would have said something.
Yeah.
So in that moment, we all have them. In that moment, rehearse what you would have said, and then say, I'll do this next time.
Yeah.
So if someone's speaking over you all the time, then you rehearse, like, how would you say this? And it's not like, there's lots of ways to do it. There's not one way, but you have to have your script, right? Yeah. And you have to have, a way of saying it. And sometimes it's not the, like, wait, pull them aside, give them the feedback. You have to actually, in that moment, stop them. And so I think that's why a script is really key.
Yeah.
What do you think about scripts?
Yeah, so just to think about a couple of, like, qualifiers or things that we often do is, for example, like, I'm sorry, I just think we might be missing the deadline. And instead of that, think about saying, based on the current pace, we're going to miss the deadline. We've got to adjust our scope, right? It's much more assertive. And then when disagreeing, which is this one, I think, is super common, instead of, I'm not sure that's right, but I could be wrong, which is something I say all the time, which probably either sounds passive or passive aggressive. So instead of that, saying, I have a different perspective than that. On that, let's take a look, right? Yeah. So it's like, and I really love that. I have a different perspective, instead of being like, you're wrong.
Because that's the dominant, is the fighting. Yeah. But, hey, and I use this actually all the time. I'll just be like, I'm going to give you my perspective. It's different than yours. And then I get it. And it's neutral. It's not that I'm arguing, but I agree with that. Yeah. And I think what's important is, the comment you just made, where you say, like, does that make sense? Don't end your statements with a question. There's also this, I wish I had more time to go on the rabbit hole of where this line came from, which is at the end of a lot of sentences, people nowadays say, right? And I'm like, where did this come from? Because I don't like it, because it sounds like you are questioning them, you're questioning you. So if I say, hey, Lindsay, it's really important for us to go to this meeting tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like, why are you saying? And it's a new way of people
Yeah.
saying things. I hear it on the radio all the time, and I'm like, why are they saying that? And I
Yeah.
think that is the passive way to do
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Or it can be perceived as passive aggressive, especially the does that make sense? It's like
yes,
your way of being like, I'm explaining something very simple to you. Do
yeah.
you
Or do you have the
understand?
capability of
Yeah,
understanding
right,
what I'm
exactly.
saying? Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that's not great either.
yeah, yeah.
And so any other, scripts that you want to, put out there?
Yeah, I would say for like people who do talk over you or interrupt you or just like are always front and center, you need to have a script. You need to figure out who that person is and how you're going to talk to them. I do think sometimes you can give them feedback ahead or after a meeting and just say, hey, like a lot of times you are speaking over people or you take up a lot of space. Do that too. But in the moment, it is, I think the script that, and I do this all the time, is like, hold on, I want to finish this thought before we move on.
Yeah.
I actually go, hey, time out. Like, it's just the way I
Yes.
think. I'm like, hey, time out. I need to finish what I'm saying so that you clearly understand this. And so it's okay to interrupt the interrupter, is what I'm saying. But you have to have your own, and it's got to be like a memorized thing, like, hold on, time out. I want to finish my thought. That's very simple, but you have to rehearse it. I also think that when someone takes your idea as their own, you need to have a script. This happens a lot. And this is like where people can get real mad. And, come up with your own script. One is, hey, I'm glad you agree with me on the point I made earlier. Let me build on it. Like now that we're in agreement and not they don't need to steal your, but you can be like, thanks. That's awesome. You agree with me. Now let's build on. Yeah.
Allison Fragale in her book, Likeable Badass. And I think she gave the credit to someone else. So I apologize that I'm citing her and not but calls that for women being he-peated, where it's like the woman says something and then, so it's like repeated, but by a dude. And then everybody's like, oh, great idea.
Yeah. And this actually happens a lot. I mean, I'm surprised. I sit lots of executive meetings. I'm like, and it's good because I'm like the third party, so I get to call things out. But yeah, it happens a lot. And I do think it happens more men taking that credit from women, but I also think it's men taking it from other men in this like dominant sort of form. So
yeah, definitely. So as we wrap up, I think we should give folks a sort of challenge. And so one of the things Mindy and I would love for you all to do is look at the last 3 emails you sent. If you find qualifiers like just or an unnecessary sorry, sort of, again, similar to Mindy's thought on like, when you think about like, oh, I should have said it this way. It's like, look at your last 3 emails and rewrite them. And you don't have to send them, but like rewrite them or figure out how you would rewrite them and practice them so that the next time it comes up, there's not so much couching and qualifying and sorries and things like that.
Yeah, and that will help you in real time speak too. If you look back at your emails or texts or whatever, because you'll see when you're doing it, and then in real time you'll realize don't say I'm sorry here, or don't say just, or don't qualify. And it does take practice. Actually, I did it this morning. I made a typo in a text and said, hey, let's meet on, I meant to say 4/17 next Friday, and I wrote 5/17. Guy writes me back and said, I'm assuming you mean 4/17. And my initial instinct was say, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, 4/17. But then I was like, no. So then I said, yes, 4/17. And it's like these little things, but that's being more assertive and it's just being more direct. And why am I apologizing because my finger bumped a 5 instead of a 4? You know? So
yeah.
The other challenge that we would say is evaluate something you want to speak up on. So maybe it's a topic, maybe it is the interrupter, or maybe it's that you hear things you don't like in your workplace or in your community, and create a script. So create it, write it down. Hey, when these people or this kind of person says this thing, here's what I'm going to say. You have to practice this stuff. That's why assertiveness is a skill. It's not like you don't just naturally have this. And so challenge yourself. Is there something you want to confront and deal with? Write the script, memorize it, think about it, and then go put it into practice. Anything related to that, Lindsay?
Yeah, another thing just came to mind is something you mentioned. This was quite a while ago, but a really good sort of response that, again, I think was really authentic to you was someone was, I don't know, being hypercritical or just had kind of become a little bit aggressive. And your response was like, ooh, I need to get out my catcher's gear so I can like catch everything that you're throwing at me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an example of something where it's like you can have it in your head,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if you did or if you like, or if it came off of the cuff, but like that's an example of something that's like not a traditional like script, but like an authentic way, and also like a diffusing way to be like, yo, dude, this is a
Mm-hmm.
little much.
Yeah. And
uh,
that's
yeah,
exactly it. Is like we've all had those situations, and that's when we get in the car and we're like, all right, I should have said something.
yeah,
And we need to say like, well, what would I have said?
yeah,
And then my thing is like, yeah, like when people are like, I use a lot of sports references because I like sports, but it's like, yeah,
yeah,
I'll say like, wow, like I gotta get my catcher's mitt, gotta get my, face mask on over here. And it always diffuses the situation.
yeah,
If you can
yeah, for
be
sure.
authentically humorous in things, like it tends to get people to be like, oh wow, like I'm being a complete jerk right now. So yeah, but you got to practice that stuff. That again, those things, some of us are quicker. Like I'm quick on a response, but a lot of that is because I was a trial attorney and I have like that's a
Yeah,
skill you learn to
yeah,
think very fast on your feet. But it doesn't mean I do perfect every time, but it does mean I rehearse things. So
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.